For our next fireside chat, which is AI adapting to our own evolving creation, I'd like to invite to stage Antoine Blondeau, the managing partner of Alpha Intelligence Capital, for a chat with Rohit Hemdev.
Good morning, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to introduce you to Antoine Blondeau, who wears many hats. He's been in AI for more than 25 years. We probably didn't even know what AI was till ChatGPT came out. He was the CEO of Siri that he sold to Steve Jobs at Apple. He also is the chairman of Crypto.com, the top 3 exchange in the globe. He's also an advisor to KKR and Pictet, so it's an absolute honor to have you. So thank you, Antoine. I hope post this session, all of you feel like one of the takeaways is it's not just a buzzword, and there's this true market impact when it comes to AI. We'll just start shooting off with some questions. Could you please define AI for us, and if you can please differentiate what AI is from machine learning?
Yeah, thank you, Rohit, and again, Walid, great to be here. So defining AI is difficult, because how do we define intelligence, right? This is a big philosophical issue, and I don't think we want to get into big philosophical debates. So one thing about AI first, I guess, is that it's really not about trying to replicate human intelligence. Because if you want to replicate human intelligence, just put a woman and a man together, and what do you get? You get a new brain, right? So this is not about that, right? Artificial intelligence is about creating ways to augment, develop new models of intelligence that are going to make us a better, more performing, more productive, and a lot of other qualifiers, species. And so there was a framework that was developed by the US Air Force 60 years ago to analyze how humans make decisions. And if you think about businesses, the difference between a successful business and a poor performing business is really how we make decisions. Do we make better decisions? Do we make typically good or bad decisions? And the US Air Force came up with this model where they decomposed the process of making decisions to make sure that pilots were actually doing the right thing. And they decomposed it into 3 different buckets: perception, cognition, and decision making. And the perception is really using your senses. So, senses, what is this? I don't know what is this, but I can feel it. It's got a weight, it's got a color, I can touch it. That's perception. The next aspect is cognition. So this is a smartphone, it's got a brand, it's got a supply chain, it's got a price, competition. There's a lot of things that we know about this device here. That is the whole knowledge aspects of how we perceive, how we know the world. And the third is, once I've perceived it, and I understand, I have an appreciation for what it is semantically, then I have to make use of this thing. So if I want to write an email, I'm going to use it in a certain way. If I want to browse, I'm going to use it in a certain way. If Rohit here is threatening me with a knife, I'm going to use it as a weapon, right? So depending on the context, I'm going to use this differently. And what's very interesting is what the US Air Force found is that the most successful pilots were the ones who actually were going through these different steps very, very quickly and going through the loop of decision-making very, very quickly. And if you think about how to apply this to AI today, perception, so using our senses, today machines are already way better than humans. You can detect a cancer on an MRI or a CT scan as a machine way better than a human eye can. Optimization, the decision piece, machines are also already superhuman. You can use a machine to comprehend a very large stream of data and make decisions much faster, much better. You can optimize much quicker. Think about trading, for example. Think about pricing in e-commerce. Mm-hmm. The biggest issue is cognition. Humans are very good at cognition, at building models of the world. Machines have been very poor at it for a long, long time, and that's starting to change with ChatGPT, and we'll talk about it in a second.
Yeah, I'm grateful that's not a weapon in your hand. Can you give us an idea of what you think is the AI landscape of today?
So I think we can decompose it in a few layers. I think first is innovation. So where is innovation taking place? And there's a lot of innovation that's taking place in academia, but even more so in both startups and large big tech firms. And so that's the first layer of how I see value being created in AI, which is innovation. Once innovation happens, then where is it applied? And I think 4 or 5 years ago, when I started my fund, the large corporates that would be adopting AI were few, right? So we're talking about just early adopters. But that's starting to change very quickly. For the last year, there's been a growing understanding that AI is just not the topic du jour. It's going to be more prevalent tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years. And so if you don't invest in AI today, if you don't embrace it, then you will be left out in the dust. And so today there's this innovation landscape, but increasingly you can see a major drive towards adoption the world over.
And which countries do you think, or which regions of the world do you think are taking a lead and charging ahead?
Well, obviously the US, and particularly the San Francisco Bay Area, has been leading in many ways and still does. I could never have done what I did if I had not been in San Francisco for a long time. But it's not the only place. And I think the good news here is that AI is qualitative, but a few people can make a huge difference. So a few brains anywhere can drive value creation on a massive scale. So beyond San Francisco, you've got the rest of the US, you've got Tel Aviv in Israel, where we have been very focused for the last few years. We've made some very successful investments. In fact, the companies that His Excellency Mr. Abdullah was referring to this morning, the drone company that governed the security aspects of Expo 2020, was an Israeli firm in which we had invested. So Tel Aviv, London, I think there's a growing ecosystem here. My good friend Ray Johnson runs TII out in Abu Dhabi, and they have developed a large language model. Mm-hmm. Of course, China is also a force to reckon with.
Yeah, but coming to this region, Meena, there was a recent report by Google which spoke about the total economic impact of AI being north of 300 billion by 2030. Is that number realistic? Is that an exaggeration?
I think, first of all, whether that number is realistic or not, I don't know. However, what I'm sure of is that this region in particular has major benefits to be had from AI enablement. I'll talk about it in a second. One thing to mention here is that even in the US, which is a highly developed economy, just the impact of generative AI, according to Eric Brynjolfsson, a professor at Stanford, who's on an advisory board, is the guy who actually wrote The Second Machine Age. Mm-hmm. According to him, over the next 10 years, just generative AI is going to double the rate of productivity growth in the US. So if you can achieve that in a developed economy, double the rate of productivity growth, can you imagine what it can do for developing economies beyond the UAE in the region? So now going back to the topic of where to apply this, there was something that His Excellency Mr. Helal mentioned, right, around regulation, for example, and how to be thought leaders in the space. I'm fortunate to be, as you mentioned, chairman of Crypto.com, and I saw firsthand what happened with Vara and how they put together very quickly a framework for regulation in a digital asset space. this notion of opening and putting together sandboxes, whether it's in financial services, whether it's in healthcare, you can very quickly develop locally innovation and then use this as a showcase for the rest of the region. So there's a big role for the UAE to play here. That's number one. Sort of thinking about the seaport to airport to brainport to what? I know brainport is human, but how about the AI port, right? And I think there's this real opportunity to go from brainport to eventually AI port. Which sectors? Healthcare is a really important opportunity, whether it's in diagnostic augmentation. So we have a company that does AI-enabled radiology. There's a massive opportunity here, whether it's in medical records, whether it's in protocol management or remote health. First and foremost, a big opportunity to take the healthcare system to the next level across the region. Second opportunity, education. We've heard how education is important here, but we know just across the border in Saudi how important and that is, and how we have a large number of young people entering the workforce. How do we educate these people to the best possible curriculums? How do we personalize this curriculum? We need AI for this. Another big topic is the environment. How do we solve the climate crisis? How do we begin to make sure that our grid, electricity grid, is best optimized as we start to ramp solar, and we begin to complexify the operations of the grid? We need AI for this. Yep. Financial services, the same. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in the region, and it starts here in Dubai and the UAE, but it's across the board.
Yeah. I think there's been, moving on to OpenAI and ChatGPT, I do know you have a great relationship with them. I'm sure everybody will be quite excited to hear your expert opinion, but before we jump into it, should we take a quick poll and ask the audience on whether they've used an AI tool? Yeah, so how many of you out here have used an AI tool, download and use an AI tool? So I would say that's 75%? Yeah? Great. So what's this excitement all about, and what do you think are the limitations?
So ChatGPT. So first of all, I was an entrepreneur 3 times. And as an entrepreneur, the future never arrives soon enough. You're always ahead. You always expect it to come, and it doesn't. It takes time. For the first time in my space, the AI space, for the last year or so, we've actually witnessed the future arriving faster than we expected. I mean, if you look at the comments of Geoff Hinton in the MIT Technology Review of New York Times, just this last 2 or 3 days, Geoff was one of the lead scientists and advisor at Google and just left Google. What he says, just like what I say, what we've seen with ChatGPT, we did not expect to see before 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 15 years from now. We did not expect to see it. So the community has been surprised. By what? It's been surprised by the fact that effectively we've created something that behaves very closely, like we do, humans, that has some cognitive powers that are beyond our own. They're not perfect, far from it, but they're very good. As an interface, it's second to none. As an interface, it's better than any human on Earth, right? It may not be fully factual, it may not be fully scientific, it's certainly not fully semantic, but it is an extraordinarily good system. And to us, it's the beginning of sort of revelation that AI, so first principles, like how to predict the next word, the next sentence, the next paragraph, those very simple first principles, if you scale them, like we did with the GPT series, if you scale this to ways that are beyond human comprehension, suddenly you get to something that, wow, was not expected, and works.
Yeah. So I know I was surprised for sure. I'm sure a lot of people out here were surprised. You said even the community was surprised. The question is, were you surprised?
Of course.
And then what was the underlying, technological breakthrough that surprised you?
So here's what's interesting. None of what we have in the GPT series of models or the equivalents from Google and others or Stability, none of these are based on something that's just brand new, right? The transformer architecture, which was developed actually by Google almost 6 years ago, right? So it took 6 years. The reinforcement learning aspects of this technology, which were developed by DeepMind 10, 12 years ago. So it took 6 years, 12 years, right, to get to a point where we're today. Is that plus scale? And when we say scale, what do we mean? We mean like GPT. The first one was, I think, 1.7 million parameters. Yeah. GPT-2 was maybe a billion. With GPT-3 was 175 billion. GPT-4, we're not sure, so 1 to 100 trillion parameters. The scaling of this and the fact that we can train these models on data that we as humans will never see in our lifetime, and we have the compute capacity to do it, unsinkable again 5, 10 years ago, the data and the compute. If you apply scale to this, then you suddenly get something like this. And that's what makes the difference. It's first principles, fairly simple but ingenious architectures, and then scale, scale, scale. And when you scale, you get this.
Very fascinating. Google. So Google lost 9% or nearly $100 billion based on an AI error. What happened there, and what have they done now to rectify that?
Yeah, so it was a bit of a problem when they, on their earnings call, they tried to demo Bard, and Bard misperformed. Sure. So Bard is the Google's response to ChatGPT, and so I looked at it differently. Well, I thought, yeah, it's a poor mistake, but frankly, all of these systems will make mistakes, right? You ask ChatGPT to calculate, to make a simple mathematical computation, more often than not, it will fail, right? To me, the point, I looked at it differently. To me, the point was that, well, in just a few months, Google was able to put together a response to ChatGPT and get something out that was pretty good. And pretty good GPT-3 grade. So am I worried about Google? Not really. Right? And so they have a lot of data. They have more understanding than anyone as to how we humans use data. They have a map of the internet second to none. Mm-hmm. They can really harness this to really provide a solution that is equivalent to the one that OpenAI and Microsoft are developing. So we should not be too worried about Google.
Great. Another topic that keeps coming up with AI is basically job disruptions. How do we position ourselves as businesses for workforce displacements and disruptions?
So I think a lot of us, that is the most difficult question, right? I'm sure that most of you are, in the back of your head, are thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to be half replaced, a quarter replaced, 2/3 replaced by some machine on the cloud that's going to do my work better. And that's true. Yours truly included. That's true. And so the question is, okay, so how are we going to spend that 50% of the time that we're saving? And that's the good news. But that's the good news, that we're going to be super productive, much more efficient. We're going to focus on our, talking about creative industries, we're going to focus on what we're good at, which is being creative, maybe outside-the-box thinkers, a little less on the process side, and a little more on the value creation side. That's the good news. The bad news is that a lot of people are really working on these routine tasks, right? And maybe it's a revenge of the blue collar, so to speak, the safest jobs going forward are going to be, gardening, plumbing. That is a lot harder to automate than paralegal. And so, what is the takeaway of this is societies, governments, corporates will really have to rethink on-the-job training, have to rethink post-educational training, professional training. We'll have as societies to embrace that the most important thing is to learn how to learn. To learn how to learn is going to be the key skill going forward. Adapting, being agile, not being afraid of change. And that's difficult.
Yeah.
But that's the key of tomorrow.
Yeah. There's a lot of fear, too, on AI, right? So the question is, does AI need to be looked at closely and regulated by governments, various bodies, etc.? Or even the bigger question, can AI be regulated?
Yeah, so I guess a bit of this fear, right? Not only are these things going to take our jobs, but on top of it, they're going to run amok and just do bad things and be great tools for bad actors.
Yeah.
So, and obviously, AI, just like any technology, can be used for phenomenal gains, but also can be used for terrible outcomes, for sure. And so, how to regulate this? So one thing that I'm very vocal about is I think it's very hard to regulate AI as a whole. Just like we don't regulate human brains. We don't do that. What we do is we regulate human brains in a context of their application, right? So let me give you a very simple example. So we're talking about self-driving cars. So AI will drive cars, right? They'll be by the way, they will be very good at it. AI will be fantastic drivers, way better than I am. But how will we regulate this? Well, we'll have, today we have cars, we crash test them, right? We do an environment assessment of a car. Well, going forward, we'll have the car pass a driving test, just like we have a car, like a human, passing a driving test. Going forward, AI will pass a driving test. So when you launch a car, there'll be that step. Mm-hmm. That's the only way you're going to get an AI-enabled car out on the road. And so the way we're going to, my view of how we regulate AI is we don't regulate AI as a whole, we regulate by sector. So AI is applied to logistics, to healthcare, to use cases within the financial sector, self-driving, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so there'll be a lot of government bodies basically collaborating with industry bodies to try and regulate sector-specific AI development.
Yeah, because the other thing is, AI is very fast evolving, so you cannot essentially regulate at the technology level. If you try to regulate technology today, tomorrow it's changing. So, what are you going to do? Just like it's hard to regulate the evolution of human brain, right? Hopefully my kid is smarter than me, and they may do something that I didn't expect. But as long as there's a framework, you ring fence that within the laws of society, the habits and practice of society, you're okay. Yeah. That's what we need to do with AI. There may be things we do as societies, such as we successfully somehow managed to date to ensure that bioweapons do not exist or do not proliferate, right? So we may, as a society, decide that, well, okay, there should not be anything like AI weapons. Yeah. But I think other than things like this that are very specific, I think use case-based, vertical-based regulation is going to be much more effective.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about speed and timing. Now, based on Moore's law, computing power goes up 2x every year, and then machine learning is growing exponentially. How do you see the converge, or not in a 2-3 year period, let's say an 8-10 year period?
So, compute cost for things like AI and intelligence are going to progressively come to close to zero, right? And so, if you so that's the outcome. So if you think about this, part of our biological brain, the part that actually does a few routine things, a few things that are maybe not very creative in essence, these things will migrate to the cloud, right? So think of your part of your brain going to the cloud now, and that cloud is extremely cheap to access. So as the cloud continues to deliver economies of scale and access to intelligence and scaled intelligence at close to zero cost, you can imagine how productive this is going to be. So we're going to rely on this a lot more going forward, for sure.
Great. I think we're running out of time. So the last one thing, I'm going to read a statement by Bill Gates. What he said a few weeks ago was, no matter what, the subject of AI will dominate the public discussion for the foreseeable future. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that train has left the station. So I never thought this day would arrive, but the train has left the station. It's not just tomorrow, but in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, in 100 years, we'll have a lot more AI. AI will be an even bigger topic than it is today. And I always say, because people are always worried, AI is going to save us before it kills us, right? It's going to save us because, hey, we'll be much more productive, we'll live a lot longer, we'll be able to do a lot more fun and playing in the metaverse. There'll be a lot of things we will be able to do, solve the environment crisis, solve sustainability and agriculture, food production. AI will help us solve this. We'll be a much better society for it if we harness it, before we should start to worry about what it can do to us on the negative side.
Great. I think we're out of time, so thank you very much, Antoine. Thank you.
Thank you.